So President Cyril Ramaphosa has met with the Jewish Board of Deputies as the organization petitions for him to reopen the South African embassy in Tel Aviv. It also wants assurances that the Israeli embassy in Pretoria will not be closed permanently after a non-binding vote passed in Parliament a month ago to sever ties between South Africa and Israel due to its bombing of Gaza, where thousands of Palestinians have been killed. Now, so far, 18,000 Palestinians are known to have been killed by Israeli bombs in Gaza. Those attacks followed a similar, initial attacks, let's say, around October, on the 7th of October, in fact, when the Palestinian armed group Hamas killed about 1,200 people in southern Israel and took more than 200 hostages. Let's take this up with Northwest University political analyst, Professor Duvenhage. Very good evening to you, Prof. Good to have you back on News at Prime. So, the sense is that this meeting took place yesterday, Wednesday, yet the South African position remains unchanged, according to Pretoria. Solidarity still with the people of Palestine. How do we move forward?
Good evening, Tembakile. Yes, indeed, it took place, and I believe it was a very difficult conversation. The Jewish Board of Deputies want to restore the relationship between South Africa and Israel, and they want full diplomatic relations between the countries, as was the case in the past, and they were very much concerned about anti-Semitism in South Africa, where, according to them, there was something like 80 such incidents in South Africa in the past 6 weeks. Now, Mr. Ramaphosa's reaction was basically the same, that they are basically aligning themselves with the Palestinian people. They are against what they call the apartheid system from the Jewish on the Palestinians, and they ask the International Criminal Court to deal with the matter in terms of war crimes conducted by Israel, and they ask that all people should be let free that was taken hostage by the Palestinians. So that is in a nutshell the situation. If we can go back shortly in history, I think it was an interesting decision, not by the executive of South Africa taken, but by Parliament, to end diplomatic relations between the two countries. So in that sense, there's a bit of a difference between the executive on the one side and the legislator on the other side, which shouldn't be the case. It's a bit of a strange decision. The other point I would like to make is that I think politics should be about interests and not about ideas or friendships or maybe even ideology, in a sense. And South Africa need to be very careful within this position. They are finding themselves in a fast-changing world political order that can really change our situation overnight. And at this point in time, as a country, we need to strengthen our economy, we need investments, and we cannot ignore the role that the Jewish community, through history and currently, is playing in the South African economy as a force for economic growth, job creation, etc.
What does that mean, though, what does it mean to balance the two? Is it a suggestion that South Africa should perhaps align itself with the position of the West in support of Israel, as the Americans have done, even though there has been a long-standing solidarity agreement, quite clearly even from the days of Nelson Mandela, with the Palestinian people, very different, of course, from solidarity with Hamas, because the two aren't synonymous?
Yeah. I think we need to ask the question, where does South Africa's interest lies in terms of the international community? And now I'm talking specifically the economic things. And it's quite clear that the Western world is, when it comes to investment, when it comes to growth, and we just think about AGOA, is a lot more important than the other groups. But from an ideological point of view, the other groupings, and here I'm referring to Russia, China, Iran, Cuba, North Korea, and so on, from an ideological perspective, they are more aligned to the ANC.
Right.
My take on it is rather to go into a position where you are not taking sides, more of a non-alignment position, rather than aligning you with one group. And
Right.
I honestly believe that the South African diplomatic representatives in Israel could contribute to the position of Palestinians while they are there. When they're outside, they cannot bring about constructive changes.
Are you suggesting, sir, that global governments, including South Africa, place economic benefit ahead of, for example, human rights concerns? Because the broader issue with the people of Gaza and Palestinians more broadly has to do with the occupation, and what they say they want is self-determination, a state of their own that they can call home. And just on the issue of the economic interest, is it not fair to say that if the West, for instance, wanted to sever ties with South Africa because of a position that it's taken on a global issue, it would have happened, in fact, with Russia-Ukraine, where they imposed sanctions, yet Pretoria still made it clear that it was not going to outright condemn the Russians, even when Antony Blinken was in Pretoria and sat side by side with Minister Naledi Pandor?
Well, the Deputy Board of Deputies, the Jewish Deputy Board of Deputies, made mention of the fact that South Africa is very much inconsistent when it comes to dealing with international issues. It seems as if some are more equal than others when it comes to the application of foreign policy directives. If we look at the human rights situation, for example, in countries like Iran, and you can put Russia and China within that context, it's a lot worse than the majority of Western countries we can refer to. And the Jewish are very much concerned about these inconsistencies on the side of South Africa. We know about many war crimes conducted by the Russians in the Ukraine, and there's also mentioning of the opposite to happen there. But still South Africa keep their relations with both Russia and Israel.
Right.
So it's also a question of consistency.
It's an inconsistency, perhaps a hypocrisy, that can be said for all governments of the world, can it not? Because, for example, with the example of Russia, it's currently fighting a war in Ukraine, but is condemning Israel's bombing of Gaza. The Americans condemn Russia for killing Ukrainians, yet won't condemn the killing of Palestinians in Gaza by Israel. So that hypocrisy is not unique to South Africa. Isn't that just, unfortunately, the tragic way of the world?
No, I won't say. In the case of majority countries, we have fine broad principles and some differences when it comes to application. But in the case of South Africa, I am finding it difficult to get a clear direction. At one point, we are here, and another point, we are there. And when it comes to the Americans and the American policy at the moment, there's a huge lot of pressure coming from the United States of America towards Israel with regard to the war and what is going on in Gaza. So they are putting pressure. The moment you isolate yourself from a situation, then you do not have any influence anymore. And therefore my point that I believe we need to keep contact with the Israelis. In that sense, we could have promoted whatever norms we would set forward, human rights, etc., in that context. Now we are isolated, right. We are dependent on the international court, and that is not, I think, constructive.
Crucial to note, quite crucial to note, of course, that as far as the return of the Israeli ambassador back home from South Africa, that decision was taken by the ambassador's own government, and even the South African diplomats who are back home are here for consultations, not a severing of ties altogether, as some in Parliament, in fact, want to see happen. So does that signal that there is hope still for the relationship?
I really hope that that is the case. that we can keep open both doors, because it is important, if you would like to contribute towards conflict resolution, then you need to keep contact with both conflicting parties. But now we know, if you read the dynamic of the Israel-Arab conflict, it is clear that the majority of the Arab League countries are not recognizing Israel as a state. Therefore, it made negotiations extremely possible. I believe at the end of the day, we need probably an adapted form of the two-state approach as a political solution to the conflict in that area. But there is, at the moment, it doesn't seem a strong option with the military and the military exercises just escalating.
And quite interesting, because in the last 24 hours, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, basically shot down any suggestion that there could be a post-war period where the Palestinian Authority, which governs areas in the West Bank, takes over governance. In Gaza, where the bombing is happening at the moment, the ambassador to the UK, in an interview with Sky News, basically rejected the suggestion that a two-state solution where Palestinians have a land of their own is one of the possibilities. But I want to talk to what the Jewish Board of Deputies also said today, where they said basically South Africa's actions at the moment mean that it is compromised in its ability to act as a trusted intermediary for brokering a peace deal. Was there ever really a realistic chance of Pretoria participating in any meaningful way in this process, when you consider that at this point no one else is able to even call really for a long-term silencing of the guns?
Okay, I won't say that South Africa is a major player. I think the major players in that environment are Russia, Iran, the United States of America, Western countries, and to a certain extent Turkey can play a very critical role. But I think there's also a role for African states. And it's clear that there are many African states supporting Israel. But to answer you in a direct way, I think one of the big problems is that it is both hawks that is in government on the side of Israel, referring to Netanyahu, and Hamas on the other side, referring to the Palestinians. And this is not making it possible to create an environment for negotiations and conflict resolution. And as was the case in South Africa in the late 80s, early 90s, we had a more moderate approach towards the conflict here, and this made negotiations possible. And I think negotiations should start on an elite level. That is not impossible, because we know changes can take place in Israel, and it seems as if the Hamas leadership are very difficult, will find it difficult to consolidate their position after a war.
Do you see, briefly, Professor Duvenhage, a Palestine, a Gaza in particular, free of Hamas even at the end of this war, even after the atrocities the group committed on October 7th? It's been 2 months of bombing in Gaza, and the Israeli campaign continues, which suggests, if we're going on the stated goal, that Hamas has still not been killed off. So can that be achieved?
Well, the strategy of the Israelis is to take out both Hamas in a military and in a political way. And I think, in a way, they are progressing when it comes to the military. When it comes to the political, it's a lot more difficult. And my assessment is that answers should be found on the level of politics. And currently, with a military conflict at the level it is, this is not possible. And I think for the near future, we are going to see a continuation of the war, but we know throughout history that war cannot continue forever. At some point, you need to negotiate and create a peace treaty of some sort. And I believe the same to be true when it comes to Russia and the Ukraine.
Professor Andre Duvenhage, good to speak to you as always.